Chapter 7 is on listening, receiving, and responding. Listening is one of the most important parts of communication. One of my favorite quotes is, "The problem with communication today is that we don't listen to understand, we listen to respond." Think about how often do you catch yourself answering a question before someone has even finished their sentence. This is a very common way people communicate in America today because we're just trying to communicate as quickly as possible. We don't always take the time to really listen to what someone is asking us. And that's what Chapter 7 is about. It's about taking the time to evaluate how we listen, to analyze some of the problems with listening, to look at some of the difficulties with how we question others, and how to grow and learn from these things. This is probably one of the most important chapters in this textbook. Listening skills will help you communicate better with anyone despite any interpersonal conflicts you have. Not only do you listen to what they say, but you also get to evaluate how you can better respond to others. Our textbook says that media listening, interpersonal listening, and reading listening accounts for most of our communication. Our speaking is about 16.1% of what we do every day and how we communicate. So the bulk of what we do is listening. Just reading text, that is a form of listening. Interpersonal listening is where we're listening to others and having a conversation, whether it be a personal conversation or one with a supervisor. On this next slide, I'm going to talk about some of the differences between listening and hearing. Hearing is a physical process. It's something that we can't always block out. Things like traffic, conversations, and other noises in our immediate environments, these are things in our environment that we're not always able to tune out. That's hearing. Listening is an intentional activity. It's something that we have to engage in. Active listening is something that we have to work at, and it's not always something that comes easily. We're distracted a lot, and to intentionally listen means that we have to turn away from those external distractions. We're also mindlessly listening. If you look at people at a restaurant, sometimes they're looking at their phones or some type of device, and our textbook says that this mindless listening occurs when we react to others' messages automatically and routinely without much mental investment. This isn't always bad. Our textbook also says that this low-level information processing is a potentially valuable way to communicate because it frees us to focus our minds on messages that require our careful attention. We have things that are going on that are more important or have higher priority than idle chit-chat. So for those conversations, it's okay to have mindless listening responses. But for the bulk of this chapter, we want to focus on mindful listening. Mindful listening involves giving careful and thoughtful attention and responses to the messages received. You're also going to evaluate the message before you reply. Our textbook shows the Chinese characters for mindful listening. On the left, you have that ear because it, of course, involves our ear, which involves not just you being the person there, but also you investing yourself. It also has your eyes as well as your undivided attention and your heart, which means that you're further invested. You're not just skating over whatever it is that's being said. You are listening with your ears, your eyes, your undivided attention, and your heart. The 5 components of quality listening are hearing, attending, understanding, remembering, and responding. First, hearing. Like I mentioned earlier, hearing is a physical process. Hearing is just hearing the sound waves that hit our eardrums and clearly understanding what is said. Attending is where we physiologically choose to listen. This isn't hearing. This is where we move into listening because these 5 components are all a part of mindful listening. This is where we intentionally open that email and select the important ones that we're going to reply to. This also could be 3 people in a room talking to you, and you select which one needs your attention. This is giving attendance to the message that you're going to be receiving. Understanding is composed of several elements. You're not always going to immediately understand. First, you have to understand the language that's being spoken to you. We have a whole chapter on being able to understand language and meaning. You should understand the term listening fidelity. This is one of the terms in your textbook. This describes the degree of congruence between a listener and the message, and it describes how much you understand the information the listener gave you that you understood. Sometimes being able to understand means asking more questions. It might mean doing some more research on your own, or it might mean that you need a translation, perhaps. If you're talking to someone in a different language, perhaps to be able to understand, you first need to translate those words. These are all part of understanding. Remembering is the function of retaining that information. It's being able to recall it or able to recite it, retrieve it later on, being able to understand maybe where it fits in a context with other things that you've also remembered. Early research on listening revealed that people remember only about half of what they hear immediately after hearing, even when they listen mindfully. Our textbook also tells you that within 2 months, 50% of the originally remembered portion is forgotten, bringing what we remember down to 25% of an original message. But this loss doesn't take too long. Generally speaking, people tend to forget almost immediately. There's a cliche that says, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's usually in reference to a skill or a trade. But this also falls under remembering when we listen. That's why taking notes is going to help you remember information. Responding is how we reply to a message. It's giving maybe some observable feedback to a speaker, whether it be through a message, email, text message. You could reply verbally or non-verbally. Sometimes it's just a head nod or a thumbs up. These are all different ways that we can respond to different messages. Our textbook lists 4 listening styles, and the first is task-oriented listening, which is kind of like what you're doing right now. You're listening to a lecture for a class. Task-oriented listening is concerned with efficiency and accomplishing a job at hand. It could be something in the workplace or a task that you're working on at home, doing your schoolwork right now, for example, but it does have a certain end goal. If someone is teaching you how to bake cookies on a YouTube video, that communication has a task-oriented end result. Analytical listening is concerned with attending to the full message before you make a judgment. These are the people that really listen in to everything that's being said. You analyze the word within the context and you pay attention to that before you make a solid judgment. These listeners also have a tendency to engage in systematic thinking. These people are deep thinkers that really process the context. We talked about high context culture and low context culture in the first chapter of our book. This really employs that context listening. We need to know what avenue is a message being spoken in, what channel, what does it pertain to, rather than just taking a sentence as a sentence. Relational listening is concerned with building emotional closeness with others. Relational listening is that relationship building component because we care about others and we want to build those relationships and friendships with a close friend, or maybe build a solid relationship with a customer in the workplace or your peers in the workplace or your supervisor. This is all where relational listening comes in. You should want to build emotional relationships not only with your friends but with the people that we work with. We care about their families or what happens to them. We care if they're sick, and all this falls under relational listening. And finally, we have critical listening. Critical listeners have a strong desire to evaluate the messages they hear. They might not always apply the tools of analytical listening, but they go beyond trying to understand the topic and try to assess its quality. They want to know if what's being said is true or not. They want to know if what they're listening to is something that they can take at face value or something that they need to do additional research on. Critical listeners can also become more effective by assessing and adapting to the preferences and styles of their conversational partners. So they evaluate how other people communicate so they can be adaptable to those people. Some of the challenges to listening include information overload, personal concerns, rapid thought, noise, and the fact that listeners hear different messages. Information overload just talks about how many things that we're faced with every day between the people we speak to or our schoolwork, our jobs, our coaches, and all the media we take in. This is information overload. We can't possibly process everything we hear, read, and see every day. So we have to learn how to pick out the most important information. It's almost impossible to keep our attention totally focused for so long. Our textbook says that we understandably and sometimes wisely listen mindlessly rather than mindfully. Sometimes when we're watching TV, we're also on our cell phones or we're having a conversation, but depending on what's important to the person listening, one of those things takes precedence over something else because we can't give our full attention to more than one thing at a time. Personal concerns are a second reason that gets in the way of our listening skills. We might be wrapped up in something that's bothering us or something that we're looking forward to. If we're concerned about the health of a loved one or a family member, that might be weighing on us and it might make it hard for us to focus. It's hard to pay attention if you have test stress, for example. Also, if you're in a new relationship, you might be giddy and thinking about that and not the things that you should be focusing on. So there are many different things that distract us from what we should be focusing on, and that's a huge issue with active listening. Rapid thought is hard because people are capable of understanding speech at rates of up to 600 words per minute, and even though the average person speaks more slowly, we have a lot more spare time in there because our mind wanders. You are thinking much more quickly than I can speak, and that's why we drift off and we get sidetracked and we daydream, and that's all a part of rapid thought. And finally, we have noise, and I'm going to play a quick clip for you, and this is from the Lego movie.
Hey, listen, do you think you can explain to me, like, why I'm dressed like this and what those big words in the sky were all about and, like, where we are in time?
Your home, Bricksburg, is one of many realms in the universe. There's also this one, Pirates Cove, Knights Club, Vikings Landing, Clown Town, a bunch of others we don't need to mention. Lord Business, or as you think you know him, President Business, stole the Craggle, the most powerful object in the universe. Blah, 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 proper name, place name, backstory stuff. Is the special. I'm so pretty. I like you, but I'm angry with you for some reason. Tower at the end of the universe, put the piece of resistance onto the Craggle, and disarm it forever.
Great. I think I got it, but just in case, tell me the whole thing again. I wasn't listening.
So there were many different types of noise in that clip. Noise doesn't just mean the physical noise that you heard in that Lego clip where you hear construction going off and other random physical things in the environment that's preventing the message from being heard or listened to. But we also have psychological noise, which is our mental world. And those, of course, present distractions that make it hard to pay attention as well. Again, this goes back to the personal concerns or things that we're looking forward to, or the daydreams or other thought processes that we might have. These could be things that are bothering us emotionally, and these can also translate into different kinds of noise. When I talked about the linear communication model, noise is a big part of that because that can affect how a person receives a message, which leads into the fact that listeners hear different messages. We evaluate everything we hear, see, speak through our own personal life experiences. So we may interpret words differently. We might find the context to be off or just not as engaging, as we may misinterpret some of the information that's given to us, and we don't question that. And those are just some examples of listening challenges. I'm going to play another clip here for you, and this is from The Devil Wears Prada.
That's not what I asked you. I couldn't have been clearer. There you are, Emily. How many times do I have to scream your name?
Actually, it's Andy. My name is Andy. Andrea, but everybody calls me Andy.
I need 10 or 15 skirts from Calvin Klein.
Okay, what kind of skirts do you...
Please bore someone else with your questions. And make sure we have Pier 59 at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And remind Jocelyn I need to see a few of those satchels that Mark is doing in the Pony. And then tell Simone I'll take Jackie if Maggie isn't available. Did de Marchelier confirm?
De Marchelier?
De Marchelier? Did he get him on the phone?
Okay.
So there were a whole lot of poor listening habits that were used by Meryl Streep there in her role. She didn't really seem to care what her assistant had to say. She was definitely pseudo-listening. And pseudo-listening is an imitation of listening. In this clip here, Meryl Streep is pretending like Anne Hathaway has her attention, but really she doesn't. She's just acknowledging that she is there in the room with her. Stage hogging is when people are interested only in expressing their own ideas and they don't care what other people have to say. And this is very much the case in this film clip here. She uses almost bullying words like bore someone else with your questions. So she's also very much ambushing her and trying to get her to do what she wants. She may try to listen carefully, but she's only doing it to collect information that she can use to attack what she has to say. Selective listening is when people respond only to the parts of the speaker's remarks that interest them and reject everything else. They only hear what they want to hear. Insulated listening is the opposite of selective listening. They would rather not deal with certain topics. They just fail to acknowledge it. They just don't even address it. Defensive listeners take innocent comments as personal attacks. Anne Hathaway's character was asking for clarification, but Meryl Streep's character took it as an attack and is telling her that she doesn't know how to do her job. So these are all examples of poor listening habits that are listed in your textbook. One of the ways that we respond to others is through questioning. Questioning is a very important part of listening, and I have another film clip here for you. This is Ex Machina.
I'm Caleb.
Hello, Caleb.
Do you have a name?
Yes. Ava.
I'm pleased to meet you, Ava.
I'm pleased to meet you too. I've never met anyone new before. Only Nathan.
And I guess we're both in quite a similar position.
Haven't you met lots of new people before?
None like you. So we need to break the ice. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
What do I mean?
Overcome initial social awkwardness.
So let's have a conversation.
Okay. What would you like to have a conversation about?
Why don't we start with you telling me something about yourself?
What would you like to know?
Whatever comes into your head.
Well, you already know my name. And you can see that I'm a machine. Would you like to know how old I am?
Sure.
I'm one.
One what? 1 year or 1 day?
One.
When did you learn how to speak, Ava?
I always knew how to speak. And that's strange, isn't it?
Why?
Because language is something that people acquire.
Well, some people believe language exists from birth, and what is learned is the ability to attach words and structure to the latent ability. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. Will you come back tomorrow, Caleb?
Yes.
Good.
I chose this clip to play because if you saw a robot that was really advanced, you'd probably have a whole lot of questions for them also. In this scene, there were many open questions and closed questions. As you noticed, they answered a few yes or no questions, but there were also some that allowed the responder to elaborate if they chose to. It also illustrated some differences in language. If we look back to the last chapter where we talked about listening fidelity, there was a slight language barrier when he said, "How old are you?" And she said, "1." He asked her, "1 what? 1 year, 1 day?" And she didn't know how to answer, so there was a gap in their language. Some of the other things that were included in this clip are sincere questions. This is where you're aimed at understanding others. Sincere questions are used for clarifying meaning. If you're told to do a task and you ask why or how, these are all ways you clarify meaning. We also do this to learn about others. The characters in the Ex Machina clip are curious about one another, so they ask questions to learn about one another. They ask each other questions like, "How old are you? What is your name?" They also use terms like breaking the ice. Well, if you were talking to someone who's from a different culture, they may not be familiar with what you're talking about. We might also ask questions to encourage elaboration. If someone tells you something that's a very brief fact, but you want more information, like let's say they said, "I went to this amazing theme park," which is awesome, but maybe you want to know what kind of rides were there, or what kind of food did they have, maybe how much a ticket costs. So encouraging elaboration is all a part of questioning. Inspiring discovery. Hopefully, I'm inspiring you to discover more about communication studies in this class by asking questions. I give you assignments so that you can learn more about communication studies and learn more about these topics in the real world. And also, questions are just used to gather additional facts and details, whether it's something work-related or school-related or something personal. So any of these things are used to ask sincere questions. Beyond sincere questions, we have counterfeit questions. These are disguised as attempts to communicate, but you really don't want an answer from the other person. Our textbook talks about trapping the speaker. The example they give is, "You didn't like that movie, did you?" They're already making an assumption that someone doesn't like a film, and they're trapping the speaker into either saying, "Yes, I did," or "You're right, I didn't like it very much." Then there's also questions that make statements. Our text talks about accusations like, "You're finally off the phone." In this example, you're not just saying that you're finally off the phone, you're saying that you've been on the phone for a long time and you're not happy with that person. There's also questions that carry hidden agendas. Let's say you ask your friend, "Hey, what are you doing this Saturday? It's been a while since I've seen you." And they say nothing. And you're like, "Great, can you help me move? Oh, and can you bring your truck?" So you asked if they were free first, so they couldn't go, "Sorry, I'm going to be busy that day." There's also questions that seek correct answers. For example, does this dress make me look fat? If you say yes, you're in a lot of trouble because you're not validating their selection. Not my dress. I'm not wearing a dress. You know what I mean. Then there's also questions based on unchecked assumptions. Things like, why aren't you listening to me? Or why aren't you paying attention to me? Or are you okay? You seem really upset. What's bothering you? These are assumptions because when you ask someone, are you okay? You seem upset. And if they're not upset about anything, then this is an unchecked assumption. If you say you're not listening to me because you're not making eye contact with me, that's another really bad assumption because a lot of times people are better listeners when they're doing other things like drawing mind maps or doodling. It's scientifically proven. So that would be an assumption if I ask them, are you paying attention to me? Paraphrasing is feedback that restates the message you interpreted and restates them back to the speaker. Normally, there are 3 approaches to doing this. You can change the speaker's wording, you can offer examples, or reflect the underlying theme. This is a great way to clarify information that's been given to you. By paraphrasing, you learn what the speaker wants, you'll learn one point that they're trying to get across. If someone's trying to explain a task to you or teach you how to do something, paraphrasing is a great way to validate that you understood what they want. Empathizing illustrates that you identify with the speaker. I love this quote from our textbook. Empathetic listening is an expression of affection as it communicates validation and a sense of worth to the message sender. Empathizing is definitely a version of sincere listening and sincere questioning because it shows that you really care about the other person. Sometimes it can be something just as brief as, wow, I'm sorry that you're having a really bad day, or wow, that one's really hurt if you see someone fall down. It's just conveying empathy and showing that you care. Our textbook also gives examples of what happens when you don't empathize. When you don't empathize or you gloss over someone else's feelings when you're communicating, our textbook says that you deny others the right to their feelings because you're not validating the fact that they have a feeling that should be recognized. You're just minimizing any significance that it might have to them. If someone's having a bad day and you're like, you should just get over it, you're not really validating the fact that they've had a rough experience. And yes, maybe they can improve their attitude if they just change their environment or change their mindset. You still need to have that empathetic acknowledgement that yes, their day sucked and you're really sorry. What can we do to make it better? Along with empathizing is supporting. This is providing solidarity with the speaker, whether it's through agreement, offers of praise, offers to help, reassurance, and diversion. Being in a classroom with someone is a great example of supporting. Maybe you both had a really hard test and you walk out of the classroom. You can show agreement by saying, yes, that exam was so hard. Maybe you didn't think it was that hard, but someone else might have. You can also show support by offering to help. You could say, well, next time maybe we could study together, or maybe you can borrow my notes. You could also offer reassurance by saying, look, you didn't do so bad after all, or, it's always going to get better from here. Or you can just throw in a diversion and saying, yes, the test was hard, you failed, but let's go watch a movie and blow off some steam instead. So these are just all ways that you can show support for someone else. These are all part of listening. It's validating how they feel, sharing your own feelings, and supporting them and lifting them up. It's important that when you consider supporting, that your expression of support is sincere. Don't just say that you agree for the sake of agreement. People can tell, usually, how sincere you are through your nonverbal, your tone of voice, and all the other things that we talked about with language. You also have to be sure that the other person will accept your support. Sometimes people are so upset and so mad that they just aren't ready to hear anything positive. And I think we can all empathize with being in this situation. When you know a friend is going through a really hard time, it's important not to be overly intrusive. Sometimes people just need a little bit of space, and you can be supportive later on. Your focus should be on the here and now. Our textbook says that saying things like, you'll feel better tomorrow, sometimes isn't the best approach. Focusing on the future avoids supporting a person in the present. So give your friend or peer what they need right now. Sometimes when you're upset or in a bad place, looking forward or looking to the future just isn't an option. It's just not something that's tangible. In addition to supporting, we have analyzing. Analyzing is a listening tactic where you interpret a speaker's message. Analyzing offers your interpretation in a tentative way rather than an absolute fact. Analyzing is really important because we all see things differently. We're all viewing things we see, hear, and experience through our own life lenses, our own understandings, our past experiences and meanings. There's a big difference between saying something is the truth or giving an alternate and saying maybe a different reason could be. For example, if I have a disruptive student in the classroom, I would never say that that student is a bad student. I don't believe anyone is bad. I usually look for another reason. Maybe they had a really rough class before me, and coming into my classroom and sitting for 50 minutes is just a little bit too much for them. Maybe they had a rough childhood. Maybe they have a behavioral disorder, so sitting still is just a challenge for them. There are so many different reasons we all act out or have abnormal behaviors, or behaviors that don't fit into that mold. We need to find reasons behind that and then analyze those situations and not just make judgments. Analysis needs to have a reasonable chance of being correct. An accurate interpretation, especially one that could sound plausible, can leave a person very confused. Our entire country is suffering from that right now, especially when we talk about fake news. But when we analyze through observation, we need to make sure that we're accurate in seeking clarification before we say something. We need to make sure that we're staying on point. It's also important that the other person will be receptive to your analysis. Sometimes we want to give someone an alternative perspective, and they might be very set in their ways and not want to hear it. Also, be sure that your motive for offering analysis to help is positive. Don't just do it to throw your own opinion in the mix. Make sure it's sincere and necessary because, like our textbook says, interpretations are often effective in helping people who have problems seeking alternative meanings and situations. It means they wouldn't have seen it without your assistance. Next, we have evaluating. We're looking at constructive criticism as well as purely critical or negative criticism. When you evaluate a response, you're appraising someone's thoughts or behaviors. This usually implies that the person evaluating is in some way qualified to make this judgment. Now make sure that when you give constructive criticism that it is constructive. Make sure that you're not just criticizing for the sake of being critical. If you have a new idea about something or a new way to do something at work, a new procedure that might be more effective and efficient, make sure that those evaluations are appropriate. Going back to communication competence, we want to make sure that we're being both effective and appropriate. And that's especially important when we talk about evaluating as well as advising. When we look at advising, we consider these to be professionals, whether it's a college advisor, a professor, or a counselor. In these situations, the receiver offers suggestions about how the speaker should deal with a problem or make decisions. And we give advice to our friends all the time. It's important to remember that if we are giving advice, that we ask if the advice is needed, that the advice is wanted in the right order, and if it's coming from an expert. Some advice doesn't need to come from an expert. If I ask my best friend what color shoes to buy, I don't need a professional shopper to make that decision. They probably know me well enough to know whether or not I want brown or black shoes. But it's important to ask these questions before giving advice or before listening to advice from other people. Make sure to go back in your textbook and read about how critical listening is important in the workplace. The textbook says that numerous studies find listening to be the most important communication skill for entry-level workers, subordinates, supervisors, and managers on several dimensions: job and career success, productivity, upward mobility, communication training, and organizational effectiveness. Please read Chapter 7. Here I have your learning objectives for this chapter. I'm going to keep this video short. I hope you guys are doing well. Take care.